This is an article from Variety, and this is from Steven Soderbergh. Steven Soderbergh's a very prolific director and director and producer. Producing credits, I don't really like to mention because it's not like the producer has a whole ton of control over the artistic elements of it. But a good director that goes into producing, often you can expect that their eye for film means that they'll choose to back the right project. So in that sense, their opinions carry some weight. But this article, it says, Steven Soderbergh calls out superhero movies' lack of sex. Nobody's effing. That's a direct quote. I didn't even censor myself there, but it says.
Do you think he said effing?
No, I'm sure that Variety did this to be family friendly. Steven Soderbergh's directorial career has included Oscar-winning dramas like Traffic and Aaron Brockovich. You must love Aaron Brockovich.
I literally don't know who that is.
Okay. We'll talk about it after.
It sounds familiar.
Yes. Okay. Science fiction mind-benders such as Solaris, heist comedies such as Ocean's 11, historical epics, Che Guevara movie. I've never seen it.
Oh, man.
And more. But he never crossed over into making Hollywood superhero tentpole movies, and don't expect him to either. Speaking to the Daily Beast ahead of the streaming release of his new thriller Kimmy, that was the one you were mentioning.
Yeah,
yep.
So it's new on HBO Max. I kind of want to watch it because it looks like it's
What's it about?
I didn't read it, but it has
You kind of want to watch it, but you didn't read it?
well, because like visuals get me first. So like the poster art is basically Zoe Kravitz, my bad.
Just think Lenny Kravitz, but really attractive.
Yeah, basically she's the main actress for it, and she's wearing like a blue wig, and it got me because it's like all neon.
Okay. So it's like right up your alley visually.
Yeah, visually it looks nice. Let's hope I
Look
don't
it up
get...
and see what it's about. I'm
Yeah,
just curious.
go ahead.
So Soderbergh says he's not approached to direct superhero franchises, nor does he envision writing one. The filmmaker said it'd be almost impossible for him to work in the superhero space since the characters are completely sexless. That is very, very sad.
And he can't. That doesn't work for him.
He's like, look, I'm an artist. And I didn't want to do porn because that would be sleazy, but I do want to put sex in my movies. So rather than do the real thing, I'm just going to make my actors feel incredibly awkward in the search of truth.
What does he say? Like, why does he need sex to tell a story?
Well, let's find out. He says, I'm not a snob. It's not that I feel it's somehow lower tier in any way. It's really because it becomes about what universe you occupy as a storyteller, Soderbergh said. I'm just too earthbound to really release myself to a universe in which Newtonian physics don't exist. I love the release myself. That felt very like, I don't know.
It's a good line.
Yes, it felt very...
I think I'm going to start saying that.
Yes.
Like, are you going to watch this movie? No, there are no Newtonian physics in that universe. I'm not ready to release myself to that.
Even that feels vaguely sexual.
What does that have to do with sex?
It says, I just have a lack of imagination in that regard, which is why the one foray I had into pure science fiction, 2002 Solaris, was essentially a character drama that happened to be set on a spaceship. Also, for a lot of these, for me to understand the world and how to write and supervise the writing of the story and the characters, apart from the fact that I can bend time and defy gravity and shoot beams out of my fingers, there's no fucking... That's what he said. That's his words. I apologize, YouTube. If this I don't think Spotify cares.
You giggled through it, so it's like you broke it up. It's not a real world.
Soderbergh continues, nobody's fucking... I'm going to keep doing that to see if it prevents us from getting censored. I don't know how to tell people how to behave in a world in which that is not a thing. The fantasy spectacle universe, as far as I can tell, typically doesn't involve a lot of effing. And also things like, who's paying for these people? Who do they work for? How does the job come to be? He's right about all those things. Like, those are the questions that my ADHD brain
I was
gets
gonna say, like, some of this stuff I agree with. Like,
spot on.
It's something that I think comes up when I'm on the show. I don't watch Marvel and DC in the comics, and I've never really seen anything else. Like, it's just not something I'm happy to go to the movies with other people who have decided to see it, but it's not something I'm ever drawn to on my own. And I can understand as a director being like, this world doesn't appeal to me, in part because it's not engaging to my creativity, and also like the practicality of it. Like, you have to accept a certain amount of suspended disbelief.
A lot of suspended disbelief.
And like, if you can't do it, you can't fake it, right? It's better to pick a different genre.
One thing that somebody always pointed out to me, I shouldn't take it. It's like they have like all these shows where like they have like holographic display computers, but they're still taking Ubers.
Yeah.
I'm like, how is that a thing? How is one?
It is weird the way that technology progresses. I mean, like there are things that people expected us to have by 2020 that we don't. But in a lot of ways, there are all these tiny advances in technology that make all the difference in the world.
And then, but also like whenever they destroy these cities, I'm like, who the hell rebuilds these cities?
Oh my god!
I want a movie where a dirty where like an evil like contractor pays a supervillain to destroy a city just so he can get the contract to rebuild it.
That's like actually what's happening though. It's
Yes.
like let all the infrastructure die.
Yes.
Like, I always think these superhero movies are kind of funny because it's like I'm gonna appear from the subway and break up this bridge, and then it's like actually if you wanted to cause problems, you would just like cause potholes periodically everywhere, and then eventually the road would decline and the government could never fix it because they're entrenched in bureaucracy and there's no money, and then you control the city by offering to be like this quote unquote nice guy who starts a fund, and then everyone starts listening to you all the time and you want all this influence even though your actual agenda is evil. Like that's a realistic movie.
That would be a far more interesting movie to me as well.
I understand that visual effects is more important in the movies.
Yes, to the people who love these movies. I'll also say he probably goes on further, but I'm going to point out the real reason that there is no sex in these movies is because they're trying to appeal to the widest audience possible.
Yeah.
And just because it's PG-13 does not mean that mom and dad aren't bringing their family of 8 kids to these movies. They are.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people who like to abstain from watching like overtly sexual content, even that's separate from porn. I mean, like, I have advocated off and on for a use of sex. I'm not trying to be a Puritan about it, but like if you're just showing a graphic sex scene because you think that'll shock your audience, like is that actually contributing to the story or
does it move the story forward?
Yeah. And so in this case, like I understand what he's saying, but is it necessary? Like, would the DC movies or whatever he's talking about, Marvel movies, be better if they had a sex scene? I don't know that that's true.
Think so. They did it in the Eternals, and it was like advertised heavily in these magazines. Like, it's the first sex scene in a Marvel movie, and it was like 30 seconds long and very stupid, and nobody cared.
Also, like, do you need it? Like,
it was completely unnecessary.
And there are, I would say, other movies and plays and all sorts of things that do rely on sex. They do need a sex scene to advance the story.
Last night, we went and saw Death on the Nile. Now, this wasn't a sex scene, but there's a scene at the very beginning. Dancing. It's essentially Dirty Dancing. And I tried to explain to Miracle and Brian why I thought this scene was actually extremely relevant and necessary to the plot, because it speaks to the mental state and the connection between these two characters that comes back into play later in the movie. So that's an example where something that Miracle and Brian both felt that it was gratuitous. In my mind, I felt that it actually fleshed out an area of the story that was extremely relevant to the plot at the end. So that's an example of where I think it matters. And you could maybe do that in these movies, but I think there's, in a world where they can shoot laser beams out of their eyes, there's 1,000 other ways you can establish a connection like that doesn't have to be done through that.
Yeah.
Like I said, I don't care if they do. Like I'm in my 30s. It doesn't bother me or make me uncomfortable. But a lot of these movies are being brought. Their kids are being brought to these movies by parents.
It's an option for families to watch. Yeah.
So it's.
I think that there's a place. I mean, like I don't think good art needs to have a sex scene, and I honestly think in some ways this article is relying on that quote for a little bit more. I don't want to say clickbait, but they're picking what people would be most shocked about. Whereas, like, I actually think his comment about like who is paying for these people's lifestyle is way funnier.
So it says Marvel Studios generated headlines last fall with the Eternals depicted the Marvel Cinematic Universe's first sex scene between characters. Although the moment was brief and only included the faces of the two characters involved, it's not an R-rated movie. Why would you expect there to be more than that? Like I said, what they did in that scene could have been done through facial expressions in any number of situations that didn't have to be that. But a lot of these people, they're obsessed with it. And it says, you can't tell a mature love story if you're not going to do some kind of... And then they're talking about the director of the Eternals. And then Zhao trailed off. It's lovely to see two people show physical affection for each other, kiss, make love. Yes, but that is not necessary in these movies.
Yeah, and I disagree with the comment that you can't show a mature love story without the depiction of sex. Like, I really just don't believe that. And again, I'm not advocating for a complete abstinence of sex in movies, but like, I think if you rely too heavily on that, you're actually underdeveloping an emotional connection.
Agreed. I think Hollywood is obsessed in a lot of ways with that type of stuff. Like I said, I'm not a Puritan. I'm the one who said I thought the scene yesterday was absolutely necessary. That stuff doesn't bother me. But from a business standpoint, not even from an artistic standpoint, these movies cost $150 million to $200 million to make. They're not going to limit their audience by putting in scenes that they think our parents, even for a minute, might prevent their kids from going to see. They're going to keep it as safe and as cookie cutter as possible.
Well, and I would say too, like, what does the studio value more? Like, if you can create an in-depth emotional character that has a good story and like draws audiences in, and you don't have to go through, because they have to like meet with censors and they have to meet certain regulations and there has to be all sorts of compliance when you film a sex scene. Is it better to have moved without it? Yeah, or even before. Like, actors have to be comfortable. There's all kinds of stuff. Or is it more valuable to have the PR marketing where people are like, oh my gosh, wild sex scene, first ever in this kind of movie? Like, which one is more valuable to the studio? I would bet that it's less expensive to not have a sex scene, and if it draws a wider audience, it earns more money. And it's just a political minefield. Like I said, we watched Reacher, and there was a sex scene in that show that had nudity in it, and it had a female director, a female writer, and I just can't imagine they were going to let guys direct or write that scene in 2022, because first of all, that tells me that the woman's the one who needs to feel comfortable, not the man. I find that relatively sexist in a certain way. It's and then also it's like they have intimacy coordinators on site who are there to do this stuff. And like, if you didn't have to pay an intimacy coordinator, like, that comes out of your budget. Like, I'm just saying, like,
you're spot on.
They should be happy that it's not there.
Yep. And like I said, it's just easier. It requires less of them to just find another way to, like, and I also think that there's something to be said about try to make that emotional connection happen in a less predictable way. Speaks to the talent of the artist or the director. Yeah. Is this something that you feel like you need to see in movies?
No, not really. But you remember that controversy with Batman where we saw his wang?
She's referring to the actual comic books.
I wish you had said we saw his Bruce Wayne.
Oh, yeah. But yeah, they did the same thing like that. It's not necessary, but I don't know, like, from an artist standpoint, you want to be edgy, you want people to, like, pay attention to you, so you tend to do, like, shocking value.
But are we shocked by sex scenes anymore? I mean, we're so desensitized. Exactly.
Plus, these are, like, cookie cutter billion-dollar franchises that are not designed to be edgy in any way. They're designed to be mass appeal.
Yeah. So. I don't know. It's just weird because certain countries, it's still, like, shocking, but for us, I feel like as Americans, we don't care anymore.
See, I think other countries are less uptight about this stuff than we are. Like, I mean, I'm not talking about, like...
I think there's a huge variety.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it really depends on where you're selling the movie.
There's also this weird puritanism in America right now that's going on where it has to do with gender dynamics and everything, where the men can be objectified. They can be shirtless with 8-pack abs all the time. Women are very, very seldom allowed to be sexualized because for gosh sakes, the male gaze. The last thing we would ever want is to make men happy, even if it's to the benefit of the story.
Yeah.
Which is less about Puritanism, but it's a form of Puritanism through the nature of identity politics.
Sorry, my dad's calling me.
It's okay.
No, you're good.
No, I think that ultimately that our interest in sex has changed a lot over the years, and we don't need it the way we used to, or like for an artist, like, I don't think it has the same impact. And I personally, and I know this isn't true for everyone, am more interested in seeing more subtle and more artistic uses of sex, or like references to sex that are oblique, or characters that we understand that they might have sex, but like the dynamic between them doesn't hedge on whether or not they're sleeping together. It's sort of a tired trope to have some crazy sex scene at this point.
Yeah,
I remember.
think so.
I remember when in the show Bones, when Booth and Brennan finally get together in like season 6, they don't even show it because they said there's no way that any amount of whatever we just tried to do here would ever live up to whatever the people who were desperate for these two characters to get together. There's no way it would have lived up to their expectations, so they had to kind of find a way to bring it to an emotional crescendo through something else, and then it's implied the rest of the way.
It's called imagination.
Yes.
People can
There's
do
no
it.
space for that anymore. I really feel like so much of Hollywood is like, here's exactly what you need to see and think and believe that we did at all times. And I personally like to use my brain more than that. And so I don't want you to shove it down my face or down my throat. Can't talk either.
Oh man, there's a great joke. I'm going right.
No,
okay,
don't do it.
I'm too innocent for this. It went over my head.
Okay,
I
so
don't know
in
what's happening.
another example of that is like in Euphoria, there's extensive drug use, right? Or like you see, like in the they have these graphic depictions of drug use. But if you watch old Hitchcock movies or old techniques in movies, they would have things where somebody would snort something, but the camera would be above their nose, and you just see their head moving.
So much more interesting.
So much more interesting and so much more dynamic in the way that it was done. At that time, it was probably done more out of a utilitarian need to avoid the censorship. Whereas now, with the gloves off on something like that, it's not as much there.
Well, and I would say that like there's some it might be a Humphrey Bogart movie where it's adventure and they're doing whatever and he saves the girl, and then there's they fall into each other's arm, and the next thing you see is a train going into like a tunnel in a mountain. Like, that's
Perfect.
racy. But it's also like you're in on this understood secret in a way that like if they had just shown them in bed together, like, yeah, I would have gotten the point, but that last shot is so much deeper and it makes your mind work, which is like what I personally look for out of TV and movies.
So much more art in that to me. Yep, I agree.
I don't know. I just don't really care for it.
Weird for somebody who loves violence as much in these things that you did. Like, I like that you're like, she's like, I love watching all the violence, but all that sexual intercourse, I don't want to see that stuff.
Well, because I'm not a preteen who's like craving to see it.
Exactly. It's so like,
I'm an adult, and you can, as an adult, you can get it, especially as a female. You can get it. You can just say, I need it, and you'll get it.
It's really
you can live it.
It's really the weirdo Tumblr generation that's spilled out onto the internet.
That's true.
That causes all of this to happen.
Also, to walk back what you asked me earlier, what the Kimmy series is. So basically, she's agoraphobic that has evidence to a crime.
Oh, interesting.
And she's like running away from. Yeah, I would do the same thing.
Sorry, I'm trapping a stink bug over here.
Yeah.
Okay, she's an agoraphobic.
Yeah, she's agoraphobic who, surprisingly, she works with technology. So like basically her whole day is just being in front of computers.
How relatable in the work from home era. I love it.
It is. It's perfect.
Yeah, and it's funny because like she finds like a piece of evidence. I found this out all from a trailer. She finds a piece of evidence from a violent crime, and like now like she's trying to like hide from everybody. Because apparently whoever's in charge is like a higher up somewhere in the world, and they're like, we need you, and she kind of looks like Coraline.
Okay, cool.
From the cartoon.
Well, that might be interesting.
Yeah,
that might be interesting.
She got freckles. I admire that.
Thanks for watching this clip, guys. If you want to see full episodes or follow us on social media, links are in the description below. Bye.
Bye.